She pushed a cleaning cart by day, but by night, she signed their paychecks. When the executives of Hamilton and Reese laughed at the invisible cleaning lady, they had no idea she was the CEO of the company that kept their offices running, and the one person who could destroy their careers with a single decision. The office of Hamilton and Reese was a symbol of corporate prestige, nestled in the heart of Phoenix, Arizona. Its marble floors gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the air carried the faint scent of freshly brewed coffee. Every morning, the building came alive with the sound of polished shoes clicking against the floor, confident handshakes, and the hum of corporate chatter. It was a world of tailored suits, expensive watches, and ambitious minds chasing success. Amidst this polished chaos, Denise Parker moved quietly through the halls, her presence as unnoticed as the air everyone breathed. A middle-aged black woman, Denise wore the company-issued uniform, navy blue slacks and a gray polo shirt. Her cleaning cart, stocked with disinfectants, trash bags, and rags, rolled smoothly behind her as she went from office to office, wiping desks, emptying trash cans, and scrubbing away the remnants of late-night meetings. She had been doing this for years, her movements practiced and efficient, her demeanor calm and unassuming. Denise didn't expect acknowledgement, and she didn't get it. To the employees of Hamilton and Reese, she was part of the background, a fixture as invisible as the walls she cleaned. But Denise noticed everything. She knew who left half-finished coffee cups on their desks, who hoarded stacks of old reports they'd never read, and who gossiped the most near the coffee machine. She was a silent observer, her eyes missing nothing. Near the break room, a group of executives stood laughing, their voices carrying down the hallway. Ethan Brooks, a junior manager in his late 30s, leaned against the counter, his tailored suit and cocky smirk making him the center of attention. Beside him stood Tom Reynolds and Jessica Lane, both senior executives in their mid-40s, their laughter echoing through the space. "Did you see Denise again?" Ethan said, his tone dripping with mockery. "She's always here. You'd think she owns the place." Tom chuckled, adjusting his tie. "Probably makes more money off overtime than some of our interns." The group erupted in laughter, their voices loud and unapologetic. They didn't lower their tones, they didn't think they needed to. To them, Denise was just a cleaning lady, someone they could mock without consequence. Denise, wiping a nearby counter, paused for a moment. Her hands stilled, and her eyes flickered with something unreadable. But she said nothing. With a quiet resolve, she grabbed her cart and wheeled it toward the next office, her movements smooth and deliberate. The moment didn't go unnoticed. Mark Stevens, a young intern barely a month into his role, stood in the doorway, gripping his coffee cup a little tighter. He had overheard the executives' conversation, and it unsettled him. Mark had always admired the corporate world, but this casual cruelty was something he hadn't expected. He wanted to say something, to defend Denise, but the words stuck in his throat. He was new here, and speaking up wasn't exactly an option. Not yet. Denise disappeared down the hallway, the executives' laughter faded, replaced by the usual hum of corporate activity. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and the day rolled on as if nothing had happened. But beneath the surface, something was brewing, a storm none of them saw coming. By 8:45 a.m., Denise reached Conference Room B, where the senior executives held their morning meetings. The long glass table was smeared with fingerprints and coffee rings, remnants of yet another brainstorming session. Denise sprayed disinfectant and began wiping the surface, her movements methodical and precise. Behind her, the door swung open, and Ethan, Tom, and Jessica strolled in, their laughter still lingering from the break room. Ethan glanced at Denise, a smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Tom," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You ever wonder what it's like to clean up after people for a living?" Tom chuckled, shaking his head. "I'd quit the first day." Jessica, though amused, added, "You have to admit, it's kind of depressing." Denise didn't flinch. She kept cleaning, her rag moving in slow, steady circles over the table. But Mark, sitting at his desk outside the conference room, felt his grip tighten on his pen. He couldn't believe how casually cruel they were, how effortlessly they dismissed Denise as if she weren't even standing right there. When Denise finished, she stepped aside as the executives took their seats. Grabbing her cart, she headed toward the door. Just as she reached it, Ethan chuckled again. "Must be nice," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "No deadlines, no board meetings, no big decisions. Just a mop and a paycheck." Jessica giggled under her breath, and Tom nodded in agreement. Denise paused at the door for just a fraction of a second, a pause so slight no one noticed except Mark. Then, without a word, she pushed her cart forward and disappeared down the hallway. Mark sat frozen at his desk, his mind racing. He had always believed in the corporate ladder, in the idea that hard work and ambition would lead to success. But this casual cruelty, this arrogance, was something he hadn't signed up for. He glanced down the hallway, where Denise had vanished, and for the first time, he wondered if there was more to her than met the eye. The day dragged on at Hamilton and Reese, the office buzzing with the usual rhythm of meetings, emails, and conference calls. By 7:15 p.m., most employees had packed up and left, their desks empty and the hallways quiet. The usual corporate energy had faded, replaced by the distant hum of vacuum cleaners and the occasional murmur of the cleaning crew. Denise moved through the empty corridors, her cart rolling smoothly behind her. She liked this time of day, when the noise died down and no one was around to remind her of her supposed place. As she wiped down desks and tidied up the break room, her mind wandered to the events of the morning, the executives' laughter, their mocking comments, and the way they had dismissed her as if she were invisible. In conference room B, Denise sprayed disinfectant on the long glass table, wiping away the crumbs and coffee stains left behind from yet another meeting. The night shift was routine, nothing surprising, until the door swung open behind her. Mark, the young intern, stepped inside, breathless and looking around frantically. His eyes landed on his laptop, still sitting on the table from earlier. "Oh man, I almost lost it," he muttered, grabbing it and exhaling in relief. Denise offered a small smile but said nothing, continuing her work. Before Mark could leave, voices echoed from the hallway. It was Ethan, Tom, and Jessica, their laughter carrying into the room. They didn't know Mark was there, and they definitely didn't know Denise was still inside. "Man, that cleaning lady is still here," Ethan said, his voice loud and mocking. "What does she do all day?" Tom scoffed. "Probably takes her sweet time so she can milk those overtime hours." Jessica chuckled. "Imagine getting excited over a paycheck that small." Denise didn't react, not even a flinch. Her hands moved steadily, her rag gliding over the table in slow, methodical circles. Mark, however, went rigid. He wanted to say something, to defend Denise, but the words stuck in his throat. He was an intern, and these people held his future in their hands. He glanced at Denise, catching her eye for the first time. In that moment, he saw something different, not sadness, not anger, but patience, as if she had seen this exact moment play out 1,000 times before. Without a word, Denise turned back to her cleaning, her movements calm and deliberate. Mark didn't move. He watched as the executives continued their conversation down the hall, completely oblivious to the moment they had just created. To them, it was just another joke, just another cheap laugh. But tomorrow, they wouldn't be laughing. The next morning, the executives arrived as usual, unbothered and unshaken. Ethan strolled in, coffee in hand, adjusting his cufflinks. Tom and Jessica were already in the break room, chatting about their weekend plans. Mark sat at his intern desk, his mind replaying the conversation from the night before. He couldn't focus, his thoughts swirling with a mix of anger and helplessness. At 8:30 a.m., an urgent email hit everyone's inbox. The subject line read, "Mandatory Executive Meeting, 9 a.m. Conference Room A." The message sent a murmur through the office. Meetings like this didn't just happen, something was up. By 8:59 a.m., the senior executives were seated around the long mahogany table in Conference Room A, the air thick with confusion. Some muttered under their breath, while others scrolled through their emails, trying to figure out what was going on. Then, the door opened, and Denise walked in, but this wasn't the Denise they were used to seeing. She wasn't wearing her cleaning uniform or pushing a cart. Instead, she was dressed in a sleek navy blue pantsuit, tailored to perfection. A delicate silver watch sat on her wrist, and her hair was styled in a way that exuded confidence. She stepped inside with the quiet grace of someone who knew exactly who she was and exactly what she was about to do. Ethan leaned forward, blinking fast. Jessica's mouth fell open, and Tom straightened in his chair, as if his brain was still trying to catch up. Denise, however, just smiled. She pulled out a chair at the head of the table and sat down. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice calm and steady. The room was silent, the executives staring at her in stunned disbelief. Mark, sitting in the corner, watched the scene unfold with an almost unbearable sense of satisfaction. Denise folded her hands on the table, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Before we begin," she said, her tone measured, "I'd like to say something." She paused, letting the silence linger, letting them sit in their own confusion. Then, she leaned in slightly, her eyes locking onto Ethan's. "It's interesting," she began, "how people behave when they think no one important is watching." The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Denise's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unignorable. The executives sat frozen, their smug expressions replaced by confusion and unease. Ethan's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flush of red creeping up his neck. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line, and Tom gripped the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. Denise leaned back in her chair, her posture relaxed but her gaze sharp. "Let me introduce myself properly," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. "My name is Denise Parker. I am the owner and CEO of Parker Facilities Management, the company that has held the janitorial contract for this building for the past 12 years. The weight of her words dropped like a brick. Ethan's eyes darted around the table, searching for some kind of confirmation that this wasn't happening. Jessica's normally smug expression was wiped clean, and Tom's jaw tightened as he stared at Denise, his mind racing to process the revelation. Denise tilted her head slightly, her gaze landing directly on Ethan. "I've spent over a decade overseeing every inch of this building, making sure it operates smoothly. And in that time, I've seen a lot." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've seen people step over those they believe are beneath them." Ethan couldn't even look at her. His face burned with embarrassment, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Denise's eyes moved to Jessica. "I've heard people mock the very hands that keep their workspace clean." Jessica's throat bobbed as she stared down at her lap, her usual confidence nowhere to be found. Tom rubbed his temple, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Denise didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm, measured tone was more powerful than any shout. "But more importantly," she continued, "I've learned that the way people treat others when they think no one is watching, that tells me everything I need to know about them." The room felt smaller now, hotter. The executives sat in stunned silence, their arrogance stripped away, leaving only discomfort in its place. Mark, sitting in the corner, watched the scene unfold with a mix of awe and satisfaction. He had never seen Ethan, Jessica, and Tom look so powerless before, and frankly, it was about time. Denise leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the table. "So," she said, her tone shifting to one of quiet authority, "let's talk about the future of this company." The executives exchanged uneasy glances, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty. Denise's revelation had flipped the power dynamic, and they were scrambling to adjust. Effective immediately, Denise continued, her voice firm, "My company will be re-evaluating its contract with Hamilton and Reese." Ethan's eyes widened, and Jessica's breath hitched. Tom sat up straighter, his face pale. The implications of Denise's words were clear. If Parker Facilities Management pulled out, Hamilton and Reese would be left scrambling for a new janitorial contract, a process that would be both costly and embarrassing. "We'll be restructuring how our teams operate," Denise said, her tone leaving no room for argument. That includes reassessing which buildings deserve our services, and which don't. Panic flickered in Ethan's eyes. He knew what this meant. If Denise's company pulled out, it wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a financial disaster. The firm's shareholders would demand answers, and the executives' reputations would be on the line. Jessica cleared her throat, her voice suddenly softer. Miss Parker, she began, her tone almost pleading, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. We've always appreciated the janitorial team. Denise held up a hand, cutting her off instantly. Save it, Jessica, she said, her voice calm but firm. Respect isn't something you offer just because you got caught. It's something you practice every day. The room fell silent again, the weight of Denise's words settling over the executives like a heavy blanket. Ethan looked down at his hands, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame. Jessica's usual smugness was gone, replaced by a rare moment of humility. Tom sat stiffly, his mind racing to find a way out of the situation. Denise leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Fortunately for you, she said, her tone softening slightly, I believe in second chances. Ethan visibly exhaled, as if he had just been thrown a lifeline. But Denise wasn't finished, however, she continued, her voice sharpening again, those second chances come with conditions. Effective immediately, I expect this company to start making some serious changes. The way you treat my employees, and each other, needs to improve. If it doesn't, I won't hesitate to walk away. The executives nodded silently, their usual confidence replaced by a rare moment of humility. Denise's words had hit home, and they knew there was no room for negotiation. Denise stood up, adjusting the cuffs of her blazer with quiet precision. The room was still silent, the executives too stunned to speak. She glanced around the table, her gaze lingering on each of them, Ethan, Jessica, and Tom. Their earlier arrogance had been replaced by a palpable unease, and Denise knew her message had hit home. I have a lot of work to do, she said, her voice calm but firm. But I expect to see changes, immediately. If I don't, I walk. And trust me, you don't want that. The weight of her words hung in the air. If Parker Facilities Management pulled out of its contract with Hamilton and Reese, it wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a financial and reputational disaster. The executives knew it, and Denise knew they knew it. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Just before she reached it, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes met Mark's, and in that moment, without a word, she nodded. Mark nodded back, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. They both knew this wasn't just about revenge, it was about setting the record straight. As Denise stepped into the hallway, the executives remained seated, the room still heavy with silence. Ethan slumped in his chair, his face pale. Jessica stared at the table, her usual smugness replaced by a rare moment of self-reflection. Tom rubbed his temples, his mind racing to process what had just happened. Mark watched from his desk, barely suppressing a grin. He had never seen people like Ethan, Jessica, and Tom look so powerless before, and frankly, it was about time. The moment was a reminder that respect wasn't about titles or wealth, it was about character. In the days that followed, the office atmosphere began to shift. The executives, once dismissive and arrogant, now greeted the cleaning staff with nods and occasional smiles. Ethan, in particular, seemed to have learned his lesson. He no longer made snide comments in the break room, and he even held the door open for Denise once, a small gesture, but a significant one. Denise, for her part, continued her work with the same quiet grace she always had. She didn't gloat or seek recognition. She simply did her job, her presence a constant reminder of the lesson she had taught. One afternoon, as Denise pushed her cart down the hallway, Carla, a junior receptionist, leaned over her desk. Miss Parker, she said hesitantly. Denise turned, raising a brow. Yes. Carla swallowed, her voice soft but sincere. I just wanted to say, thank you. A lot of us noticed how they treated people, but we never thought, she trailed off, shaking her head. Denise gave her a small, knowing smile. The truth always comes out, she said. It just takes the right moment. Carla nodded, her eyes filled with admiration. As Denise walked away, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had seen this kind of behavior before, the arrogance, the entitlement, the false sense of superiority. But this time, it was different. This time, they had learned a lesson that money couldn't buy. Respect isn't about titles. It isn't about wealth or power. It's about character. The way you treat others when you think no one is watching, that says everything about you. So, ask yourself, how do you treat people when there's nothing to gain? Because one day, you might find yourself on the other side of the table, and when that day comes, you'll want to know you've earned the respect you're given. This concludes the story with a powerful resolution and a clear moral lesson. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments.